Looking at the sweats.
I know. I had my coat on. I had to go clean out the end of my driveway. And I'm looking at it, and there's like this much less snow at the end of my driveway. Shoot. Because I know it's just gonna freeze there. It's gonna be that much harder to deal with. And it's so bad. I was kicking myself on my shoes.
My neighbors do that. I got mine really young, so it'll use the blower.
See, I can't, my blower, I can't use it on that.
Yeah.
A neighbor, kind of described to me why, it's because it's only got one blade or something. Yeah. So you can't like just get.
So it's fluffy.
Easy. I didn't utilize them as well as I should have. Yeah. Really do a crappy job and I have to go out and create it. I could just be like my dad and just like do it again. Oh, shit.
That's like all welcome.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Matt Rogers. I'm with LaBella Associates, a senior planner. We've been hired by the city to help with the zoning update, along with SmartCode and Sidekick Creative. They're not with us tonight, but they do a lot of work in the background. Also with me tonight is Cornell Smith, Jamie Pinkowski, both from LaBella Associates. Of course, we have Alicia Bartlett and Kyle Boudreau from the city as well, part of our project advisory committee. We have some committee members in the public as well. So thanks for coming out tonight. I'm glad the weather's a little bit better than it was yesterday. And we're going to spend about 30 minutes or so just going over what the comprehensive plan has provided us in terms of direction, and then get into a little bit more details of the boards that you've seen in the side room there in terms of the proposed changes to the R1 and RH zoning districts. Okay, so like I said, we'll start with the comprehensive plan, which really provides our project foundation, little historic trends for the city that also influences the proposed changes tonight. And then we'll get into the proposed RH and R1 district changes, and we'll talk about accessory dwelling units, and then additional information on the visual preference survey, which you've seen on the boards out there, but it's also available online. I really encourage you guys to take some time and answer those questions. So if you were here the first time, you've seen these initial slides here, but the reason why we're here is that the current zoning code was written back in the 90s, and just like with every community, they get modified every 6 months, a year, and after a while, if you don't codify everything, things start to get mixed up, discrepancies, missing things, regulations are half amended, and that's typical of every community, particularly if your code's more than 30 years old. So we went through the code in detail as part of the initial process, identified a lot of the issues. The comprehensive plan identified a lot of the issues too, so we're ahead of the game there. And we're looking at ways in which to better organize, streamline the process, bring zoning and subdivision and perhaps some of the other code chapters into one. So it's a lot easier for applicants and the planning board, zoning board, and planning staff to find the specific regulations, which we hope speeds up the process, reduces costs. So the main three aspects that provide foundation for our work that we've been focused on for the last 6 months or so. One, it's a community-driven process. So while we do have a project advisory committee, it's a good cross-section of the public, both members of county council, planning board, zoning board, but also individuals that have interest outside of the city. We felt that we would bring them in and provide a good cross-section of input. And then the public input. We got the first workshop tonight's the second one, first of a 3 design workshops, so we'll have 2 more. We have a website and a lot of other opportunities for the public to get involved. Working on an updated comprehensive plan that's a little bit easier for the public to be involved is a zoning code update, which is not something most people typically pick up and read and follow. It's a little bit harder to get people engaged, so we're doing everything we possibly can to bring people out and participate and recognize the importance of this. And then the primary 2 documents are the comprehensive plan that was adopted this past September, and then the 2022 housing study. Both of those documents are key in guiding our decisions with this update. So updating your land use law is the first step in the implementation of your comprehensive plan. And that's by state law. Your community's land use code has to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plans don't write the zoning, they provide the guidance, and that's why we use that, and we'll quickly go through some of the policy recommendations in the comprehensive plan. So the housing policy vision was very straightforward. You know, it's important to provide safe, affordable, accessible housing for every resident, regardless of social, economic status, both existing and ensuring that there's diversity of housing for future residents as well. It needs to be sustainable. We want to preserve existing units where they're worthy of preservation, particularly historic structures, larger homes for larger families, but also balance that with the need for a little higher intensity homes, and take pride in the fact that the community has a big diversity of housing styles. We've had a lot of stakeholder discussions, and we do have more that we're doing. We did speak with SUNY, and they identified the need of like, you know, whatever you can do to try to retain students, because that's the future of the community, and we want to be able to provide that housing that's affordable, and also make sure we're not displacing existing residents with rising housing costs. So we need to balance that and recognize that, and also recognize that we have to balance new development and renovations with protecting historic structures, and which can be expensive, whether it's historic or just an older structure. You know, the maintenance costs continue to rise every year. So that creates a burden and creates stress on the housing supply, both from the cost and then just the overall availability of it. So the comprehensive plan had a variety of policy strategies and objectives for housing, as well as environmental situations, recreation. Tonight we're just going to quickly touch on a few of the policy strategies. So preserving existing housing units, promoting safety, maintenance standards, but without jeopardizing affordability. Very key. Make sure we do what we can to discourage unnecessary demolition, provide opportunities for accessory dwelling units, but also recognize that we have to balance that with allowing perhaps short-term rentals, but not having the short-term rentals necessarily gobble up the accessory dwelling units and other units as well. So we've only dipped our toe into the short-term rental process, and we'll talk about it tonight just in the context of accessory dwelling units. But we recognize going forward, we will have to do more work on the accessory dwelling unit front, or the short-term rental front, rather, as well as the ADU front. Expanding housing affordability, so there's a variety of ways of doing that. While we did sit down and talk with the Plattsburgh Housing Authority, the zoning code is separate from their work, but it certainly informs what they can do, and we want to make sure that we maintain a good partnership with them and identify opportunities for perhaps future partnerships between private developers and the housing authority, and providing housing types and density that meets the needs of the housing authority, as well as just general more affordable housing that's not regulated by the housing authority. Strengthening the protections of vulnerable populations gets back to what we originally talked about, is making sure housing is available for every resident, regardless of income or other situations, age, etc. In diversifying housing types within the neighborhoods, so avoid either which has happened in the past, which was on purpose in terms of segregating certain neighborhoods in terms of race or income.
Just want to make sure the card is working.
Yep. So we're looking to, by allowing for a higher density type housing in different neighborhoods, the idea here is that we're increasing the diversification in those areas and not having areas just for affordable housing. And that becomes a more diverse and healthy city if those housing types are mixed in within reason. Here it gets specifically to modifying the city's zoning ordinance to encourage infill, and that's part of what we're talking about tonight in the RH zoning district in particular, and looking at removing constraints or other unnecessary restrictions in the code, such as cumbersome review processes for different types of housing, which increases the costs and also deters certain people from trying to make these investments. Promoting a sustainable land use pattern, looking at ways to maintain the walkability of the city, whether that's through focusing density around the city's core and in areas with other high walkability and less dependence on personal vehicles. Fortunately, we don't have necessarily a great public transportation system here. Maybe someday that'll occur, but we're looking at it from the standpoint of getting people, allowing them safely to walk from their homes to services or other businesses or school. It's a very walkable neighborhood or a very walkable city. What we want to be able to do is maintain that going forward and incentivize that type of development. And then finally, encouraging development that meets the diverse housing needs both now and projected demands. And we'll go through some statistics in a minute in terms of the availability of housing and how that's been decreasing, even though more housing has been constructed over the last 10 years here. So here it gets into what's called missing middle income housing. And the comprehensive plan had a big focus on that. The point of this is, over the years, communities have started drifting more towards detached single-family homes. So you had this big gap between your single-family homes and here it's called mid-rise for your higher intensity multifamily, whether that's downtown or adjacent. So the idea here is that we want to look at all the zoning districts and make sure that within reason, different types of residential types could be allowed in those areas, whether they're duplexes, which are two-family, right on up to fourplexes in certain districts, as well as live, work, and mixed-use type uses. So this focus has been guiding us over the last few months with our work in these two districts. So I just talked about walkability and the 15-minute neighborhood concept that the comprehensive plan focused on. And we had done a series of maps, they're available online, and we went through them at our first workshop. That pretty much confirmed that regardless of where you are, for the most part in the city, you're within a 15-minute walking distance of a commercial node, school, or other services. So that's fantastic. The majority of it does have sidewalks. There are obviously some neighborhoods in the R1 district that don't have sidewalks, but it's still walkable, and we want to preserve that. So we use this to try to identify any commercial or other service areas that exist that aren't properly zoned. We only came across a few, which is great. That means from the standpoint of those commercial facilities, they're currently zoned correctly. But we want to make sure that that is consistent and gets maintained going forward. So we're making some tweaks a little bit as we go forward and maintain the walkability and close-knit nature of your neighborhood. And with that, it's not just zoning, it's also what's called complete streets. So as new projects are built, maybe the streetscape's impacted, similar to what you had Margaret Street, is making sure that you have wide sidewalks, crosswalks. As new development occurs, through the new zoning law, we'll have what's called a complete street section that identifies all the different types of streets that you have in town, whether it's one with or without sidewalks, whether it has street furniture, bike racks, etc., the types of street trees, which are critically important for providing shade and keeping the temperature down in the neighborhoods. So the idea here is we'd have a street section that is very visual and is very clear as to how the city would like each of the different neighborhoods treated. For the most part, we're not necessarily going in to change the streets. What you have here in most of the neighborhoods are what we want. We want to preserve that. We don't want to allow development to come in and change the character of the street, remove sidewalks, or create pedestrian barriers. So that's part of maintaining that and enhancing the complete streets aspect. And then the housing report, which was completed prior to the comprehensive plan and influenced the comprehensive plan to a certain extent. Again, that's another important document that we're using to guide our projects going forward, such as inclusionary housing, which means perhaps allowing for development that if they provide a certain percentage of affordable housing, they can get density bonuses, they get more density than they would under the underlying zoning, or maybe even a second, an additional story. And that type of zoning, we're not calling for an RH or R1. It's likely to be downtown, maybe B1, B2, which are in future conversations. But it's just an example of creative ways to try to incentivize creating more affordable housing by giving the developer the ability to do that and have the numbers pencil out right to the benefit of everybody. So here we just want to talk a little bit about trends within the city over the last few decades. So this has a fairly steady population since 1960. Obviously, it peaked while the base was open, and then when the base closed, obviously that dropped. That should not be a surprise to anybody. And there's been some recent growth, a recent uptick, and our number of occupied housing units have continued to increase. And then, consistent with the national trend, the size of the households have continued to drop. So that influences the size of apartments and the ability for us to consider allowing for more density in certain areas that may have smaller units, without forgetting about the fact that you still want to have some homes with 3 and 4 bedrooms in it, or larger families and growing families. See the signs in areas with new multifamily development. It's usually 1 and 2 family, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and a lot of that is cost related and a focus on the elderly and the retired folks. Here we recognize that we want to try to keep them, and we'll be looking at ways to try to incentivize providing for more higher bedroom units. So housing type, as this is a college town, it should be no surprise that you have a significant number of renter occupied units compared to owner occupied units, and that's consistent with just about every college town in the state. And it just has continued to shift away from owner to renter occupied. There's a little blip there, and this data is based upon what's called American Community Survey data, which is an estimation by the Census Bureau. So you're likely to see some little anomalies there, but we feel that that's probably more of an anomaly than anything else. The point here is that we're shifting more towards rental occupied than owner-occupied. Housing availability and costs. So the rental vacancy rate has continued to drop. Once you get close to 2%, it's a pretty clear indication that there's increased competition for rentals. And if anybody is looking to more recently trying to find a quality rental, and we're not just talking about any rental, we're talking about quality rental where you be safe and you feel safe and comfortable with your family, and it's getting harder and harder to find. And even though the amount of housing units that have been constructed have been going up, and perhaps a lot of those were not necessarily for families or medium to low income, and more for retirees or single individuals. So that just demonstrates that there is a challenge here, and that the city needs to do what it can to try to meet that need. Rent burden and mortgage burden, what that means is that the family is spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. So whether that's rent and household supplies, and then for mortgage, that's your mortgage, and it also includes multiplier factors that the Census Bureau uses related to taxes. So clearly, renters are more cost burdened than homeowners, and that's to be expected. But again, that just demonstrates that the need is that much larger to provide more affordable units and quality units for renters. Move away here. The housing stock, the last point here I wanted to talk about is any city, town, village, kind of follows the same pattern, right? Most of the development occurred post World War II for the first 20 or 30 years. The city did see some upticks between 80 and 89, but it's kind of leveled out, grown a little bit, and we looked at the numbers, and there actually hasn't really been anything since 2020. But this pie chart kind of gives you an indication that it's actually fairly healthy compared to, say, other communities, but for the most part, almost 50% of your stock is 60 years old. So what that means is that every year that goes on, it's going to cost more to maintain the homes. Homes are going to get older, and we need to, in certain situations, replace those, but also look to incentivize and provide a reason for landowners to make investments on their property. And that's why another reason why we're looking at allowing for a little higher density in some of the zoning districts. So here we'll get into the specific districts that we're going to talk about tonight. And just as a comparison, so the residential historic district, which has the Court Street and Rinkerhoff historic districts that border between Broad Street and Cornelia, that has an average lot size of about 11,200, which actually is a little bit smaller if you take out some of the larger lots in there, such as the Housing Authority lot, the President's house there, a few others that aren't specifically residential. So it would actually be a little bit smaller. So it's pretty close to the average lot size for your downtown. So this represents the city's kind of main higher intensity residential mixed use area, combined to a certain extent with R2 and some of the periphery of the B1 and B2 areas. So here it breaks down all of the different zoning districts by residential type. So first, we'll start RH. So RH, 83 single family homes, and you can see that you have a pretty significant amount of apartments, 3 family and 2 family homes. We go back to R1. R1 and R2 are your primary single family zoning districts, but R1 actually does have quite a diversity of 2 family and above. And R2 is not a strictly single family district, so that demonstrates that the district that has the broadest mix of residential types. So now we're going to focus specifically on RH. This just again summarizes your existing residential land use types for that district. So the RH district, the current boundaries right here. And so we spent a lot of time as a group kind of looking and dissecting this area because it is an important part of the city to consider for rezoning. So the first area that we wanted to identify and pull out for future discussion is what we were just temporarily calling the Oak Street Transition Zone. So that area has a completely different land use characteristic from the rest of the RH district. Has the fire department, Verizon building, public housing properties, the library, a lot of the historic structures in here. They converted to offices, which is it's a good use for that. Maintaining those, they're in good shape. But that character is not quite what's in the rest of the RH district. So we felt that it's important for us to pull that out, study that, decide if we want to create a separate district there, fold it into central business zoning, or a combination of the two. So that is proposed to be pulled out of the RH district. On a similar note, we're just calling mixed use 01. That's a Broad Street corridor. Again, driven up and down that, you'll know that there's a significant amount of apartments, and commercial uses, the uses of which are not consistent with the interior of the RH district. So we're going to pull that out, and we're going to look at how we want to code that, whether that becomes part of the R2 across the street or a new district in and of itself. But that's a future one that we're going to look at, but pretty confident that we want to pull that out of the RH district. The Cornelia Street Overlay District. So right now, we're not proposing that come out, but we identified that because the majority of the residential structures there go right up to the back edge of the sidewalk, or maybe a few feet back, which is what you want as you come into the downtown, to bring the buildings a little closer, right to the back edge of the sidewalk, maximize your space, your lot, but it also creates a nice visual barrier that gets people to slow down in the cars and creates a nice walkable environment. So we'll probably have an overlay district that just addresses the setbacks differently than the rest of the RH district. I don't see that we're going to pull that out. And we may extend that a little bit further to the west, because once you get to Champlain Street on the south side of Cornelia, that's where you'll notice everything comes right to the sidewalk. Whereas you go further west, they start to come out. The rest of it is the RH district. That is in the tan color, is what we're proposing to be the new boundary, minus a proposed neighborhood commercial district, which is centered around Zook's, the laundromat, and the Chuck Wagon, and a couple other uses there. And we want to memorialize those commercial uses and preserve those going down the road. So first, we'll start off with the discussion of the RH district and the proposed changes. So this is a density chart. Here's the existing density elements, and this is the proposed. So the minimum lot size right now is 7,500 square feet. That's not proposed to be changed. What we are proposing to change is the area per dwelling unit. So right now, only single-family homes are allowed in there, along with accessory dwelling units. So the area per dwelling unit is the same size as the minimum lot size, but you can't legally create a two-family or three-family in there. We're proposing to make that change by putting in a little higher or a smaller area per dwelling unit. In the next few slides, we'll talk about how that gets calculated and then how the different alternatives are going to be evaluated. The other change we're looking to make is right now the front setback for the house needs to be 25 feet back from the property line. And if you've driven and walked through these neighborhoods, you know that they can be back as far as 30 to 40 feet, and some of them are right up to the back edge of the sidewalk. And we felt that it's important to provide some flexibility to these existing homes if you wanted to put a porch on or put an addition on in any new construction. So instead of having a hard and fast 25-foot line where anything beyond that really needs to come in for an area variance, we provide what's called a build-to zone. So under the proposed changes, you can build right up to 10 feet back from the property line or back edge of the sidewalk, whatever is closest to the structure, but no farther back than 25. So that provides a pretty large area in which you can have a porch, extend the house, or new construction, have it within that area. And that creates a little bit more consistency up and down the neighborhoods there. And by limiting it from going back more than 25 feet, it maintains that street edge that we're looking for, that you have right now. Although there are some homes that are further than 25 feet back, and this isn't going to force them to come up. They just become non-conforming. There are provisions for that. But we felt that this provides more opportunity for people to make improvements and maintain their location and limit the amount of things that may have to go to the ZBA if putting on a porch is proposed. So that's kind of the major change here, along with the density provisions. We're not looking to change the rear setback, side setbacks, or the building height. That's going to stay at 35 feet or 2.5 stories. So we did look at initially the proposed uses. So those with the asterisks are proposed. So the big change for use for the RH district would be to allow up to 4 families, 2, 3, and 4 families, along with a few others. Community gardens, pretty straightforward, not really a significant impact. Museum, cultural facility. We felt that particularly with the larger historic homes, that's a good repurposing of some of those to become some type of a cultural facility, as well as home occupation 2, which is a new term, which compared to the current home occupation, where you're not allowed to have customers that come on site, but considering certain ones that would allow for customers, whether that's a hairdresser, et cetera. And we are going to be working on specific supplemental regulations that address that, recognizing that we have to protect the joint property owners and neighbors. That the idea is we're not turning these into retail establishments. It still has to be accessory to the residential structure. And for the most part, you wouldn't see any real major change in terms of the character of the house or the intensity of the use. So that can be kind of a balancing act, but the idea here is providing more opportunities for homeowners to have a business that do not result in direct impacts on their neighbors. So here's the math part of this. So the existing density, you only get 1 dwelling unit per acre. Proposed, we're allowing 1 dwelling unit for every 3,750 square feet of lot area. You calculate that, you take the total lot area, divide it by the dwelling unit of 3,750. So if you have a lot of 7,500 square feet, you get 2 units. So recognizing that we always like to provide alternatives when we're proposing anything like this in terms of density changes, we have 2 different alternatives that are proposed. Allowing the landowner to round up. If they calculate out at 1.75 units, that means that they can round up to 2 units. So if you have a lot size of 6,575 square feet, pencils out to 175, you can get 2 units. So that's the first alternative, and we calculated the build out based upon that. And then the other alternative is would not allow for rounding. You would have to have a whole number and above to get the 2 units. So we ran those numbers to kind of see what differences we would have. So here's the existing unit count, so 83 single family, and just so you know, this is the proposed RH district. So this doesn't include the Oak Street area or the Broad Street mixed use area. Those areas have been pulled out. So 2 family under alternative 1, potentially get up to 25, and 16 under alternative 2. And then the change, potential growth for 3 and 4 family. And this is important to remember, this is only based on lot size. We did not look to calculate availability of parking, impervious requirements, other setbacks and unique aspects of the property. The ability to do that build out for this area and the rest of the city would take us a significant amount of time and would not really provide us more information. The idea here is to get at least a snapshot of what could possibly happen within this district. So this is the proposed alternatives that we're considering as a group, and we wanted to present to the public, and we did the same thing for the R1 district. First, we'll talk about the neighborhood commercial district that we are proposing. And again, that's at the corner of Williams and Brinkerhoff. Everybody knows the corner stores and the laundromat. So here, completely different way that we're coding this. So the code does allow for minimum lot size for neighborhood commercial uses at 5,000 square feet. So that's what we based our existing condition on. Proposing that to change to 2,500, which is consistent with the current lot sizes that they have here now. So we're going to create a new district. We might as well have the lot dimensions consistent with what's there now. That's the whole point of this. And the other point is that these commercial uses right now are what's called pre-existing non-conforming. That means that they're illegal, but they can continue under certain restrictions. And by bringing them in and making them conforming, again, one, that then may incentivize the property owners to make more investments in the property because they know it now it's a conforming use. If something happens with the property, if there's a fire or other issue where it has to be removed, it's a little bit more complicated if it's a pre-existing non-conforming structure. There are some provisions in the code, but we figured, hey, these have been here for a long time, provides a great service. Comprehensive plan says, let's protect our neighborhood commercial uses. So it was a no-brainer for the PAC to say, yep, let's rezone this for commercial use. And then in terms of the setbacks, similar to the RH district for providing a build-to zone. Zooks is right on the back edge of the sidewalk. I think the truck wagon is too. The laundromat's pushed off a little bit. There's a little parking area in there, no big deal. So we want to give that flexibility in this one location, and zone it to how it exists now. And that's what you want. You want a nice neighborhood, that's walkable and visually appealing. And that 10-foot area too provides an opportunity if, say, the laundromat becomes a restaurant, they can have outdoor seating, etc. Provides that opportunity for those types of uses. And then speaking of uses, all of the existing ones are based upon the RH district, since that's the currently underlying zoning district. And for the most part, the proposed uses are consistent with what we're proposing in RH. And nothing to out of the box there, up to 4 family, and adding community gardens, family daycare, adult daycare as part of the child daycare that's consistent with RH, museum and cultural facilities, and then neighborhood convenience type commercial uses. So that's the existing term in the zoning code. And while we haven't gotten to that point yet, we know that we're going to look at that. Either we'll keep that term and better define it, or we'll just remove that and just list the types of retail and commercial type uses that we're thinking of for that district. So, but that's the location where we'd like to have a smaller scale neighborhood type services, memorialize it so property owners can make investments in them. So next is the R1 district. So there's 3 different R1 areas, really 4 if you look at it. So north of Cornelia, south of Cornelia, Cumberland Avenue, and then Waterhouse streets. So very large single family zoning districts. So for here, we're not proposing to change the minimum lot sizes. We are proposing to add 2 family dwellings, which we'll talk about next. None of the other bulk standards are proposed to be changed. They're all going to remain the same. The 25-foot setback right now that you have there, that's going to stay the same. We're not allowing that build-to zone like we are in RH or neighborhood commercial. Speaking with the PAC, it was made very clear that 25-foot setback is important. We're going to maintain that. Let the ZBA address and requested area variances. So no changes from the overall bulk perspective. Uses, we are proposing to allow 2 family and accessory dwelling unit. In the case of the R1 district, the landowners will get a choice. You can get an ADU, which is smaller, 800 square feet or less, or they can get a 2-family dwelling if they have the acreage to meet that. Then consistent with the RH, we added the adult and child daycare, home occupation 2, and family daycare as proposed uses. Anything else that's on there right now are existing. The PAC will revisit all the allowable uses in the future in terms of improving definitions, maybe adjusting the terms, may add or may subtract. But this district is primarily residential. That's not changing. But we do want to recognize that we want to provide some opportunity for that smaller scale type home occupation type uses. So similar to the RH discussion, it goes through the same process here. So the minimum lot size is 7,500 square feet, 7,500 square feet per dwelling unit. And we did the calculations, the same alternatives where you can round up, not round, and the change in the potential for two-family dwellings is much more significant because the total acreage of the R1 district is significantly higher than the RH district. So under the more open approach where you can round up, there is a potential for 288 new two-family dwellings in those 4 different RH districts, okay? And then by not allowing zoning, it's about 100 or so, a little less than 100, it's less at 198. Again, that's spread out throughout those four districts, whereas you currently have 58. So on its face as a number, that's pretty significant. And just like with the RH district, the R1 district, you know, if the zoning change does go forward, it's not flipping a switch. Don't expect everybody coming in and applying for two-family. It's not cheap to convert, and recognize that the idea here is providing an opportunity for landowners to provide a second unit, and it's not, and it doesn't come without some restrictions. And that's why we're starting the conversation on residential design, because we recognize whether it's the RH district or the R1 district, that the character of the neighborhood in terms of architecture, building orientation, size is key. The use is important too, but we feel that we could allow for some gentle density increases through this approach and protect the predominant single-family look by having particular design standards in place. That you can have a two-family dwelling, but at first glance, it'll look like a single-family dwelling for the most part. And that's why it's important. That's why we know it's important. And we're going to focus more in the future on the design aspect of it. So that's the build out for those 4 different RH districts, not allowing 3-family or multifamily, which you have quite a bit spread throughout those areas. So we'll finish up the last few slides on accessory dwelling units, and then we'll talk a little bit about design. So the bottom is the existing definition. And right now, accessory dwelling units are only allowed in the RH district. And funny enough, there aren't any in there, but you have accessory dwelling units in R1, quite a bit of them, and a significant amount in R2. And that's because your current process is very limited. One of the structures have to be owner occupied, whether that's the ADU or the principal structure. I think under your current regulations, you have to put a deed restriction in that you have to maintain that owner occupancy. And that is pretty consistent with a lot of communities that have allowed for accessory dwelling units over the last 20 years. They felt whether they were pushed into allowing it, but they put in these restrictions to significantly limit the actual ability of this to happen. Requiring owner occupancy is a unfortunate nightmare. Nobody's going around and checking who lives where. And that's why I think putting in the deed restriction was a pretty creative way of enforcing that. And going forward, we recognize that those are very unnecessary restrictions. What doesn't matter who lives in the ADU or the principal structure, okay? If there are appropriate design standards in place and property maintenance requirements that the city can use at their disposal to maintain the quality of that property. So we have a proposed definition, which essentially is it provides independent sleeping, living, eating, cooking, sanitation. Has to be on the same lot as the principal structure. And we're proposing to allow them for single family and two family. It cannot be subdivided off, it cannot be sold off, but it doesn't have to be owner occupied. It needs to remain accessory to and subordinate to the principal structure, meaning it has to be smaller. And that's why we have an 800 square foot or 75% limitation, 75% of the principal structure. whatever is smaller. So in terms of how it would be applied to the different zoning districts, so RH, they would be allowed for single and two-family dwellings as the density bonus. So if you have a single-family home in RH, the minimum lot size is or is 3,750 per unit. So if you have a lot that's 4,000 square feet, you could not get a second full unit, but you would be able to apply for an accessory dwelling unit. That's the density bonus part of that. Except in R1, it is a density bonus, but the owner would have a choice. You can either have a full second unit, which could be 900 square feet, 1,000 square feet. But even if you do have the acreage for a second unit, you could apply for and get an EDU. But it would have to be 800 square feet or less. And parking would be a requirement. We'll talk about that in a minute. But occupancy, like I said before, cannot be sold or conveyed separately, shall not be rented less than 30 days. So that's the definition of a short-term rental. So that's critically important. City does not want to give density bonuses to allow somebody to build an apartment and turn around and rent it short-term. That completely defeats the purpose of increasing access to housing for, in this case, we're talking smaller families, whether it's an individual, small family, retiree, in-law, etc. Different types of accessory dwelling units. So above the garage, the quintessential Fonzie flat, the Fonzie lift, right? Everybody knows that. Detached. Over the last 5 to 10 years, manufactured home companies, and I'm not talking, single wide, double wide. These companies recognize that this is a new growing industry need, and they've been building those. This looks like it's actually been built on site, but they do have a lot of these now that are built in the factory, brought out and attached. And these, again, all have to be on a permanent foundation, not going to be on wheels. You're not going to wheel these things around. These have to be permanent. So it can be detached. It can be a converted garage. It can be a bottom garage, not separated. It could be your basement. Just like an apartment. And it's no different than an apartment. It's just, we have this fancy term now, accessory dwelling unit. We have some size limitations. So this has been going on for years, carriage houses, for example. So, but we have to recognize that there has to be some regulations and some guidance in place if we're going to give density bonuses to allow this. So only one ADU per lot, doesn't matter, even if you have 2 principal structures on the lot, which there are some lots in RH and probably not many in R1, if any, where there's 2 in principal structures. You would only get 1 ADU per lot. 800 square feet or 75% of the floor area of the existing or proposed principal dwelling or primary dwelling. And we use the term existing and proposed because if somebody is building a vacant lot and they want to build an ADU at the same time, we want to make sure the language is consistent, that they can propose and construct an ADU at the same time. They don't have to have a principal structure first in order to do that. There will be 1 parking space that is going to be required. As part of our zoning update process, we are going to be looking at the overall parking regulations for both residential and non-residential, but we felt that this was an important one that we're just going to put the market on now and say for an ADU, you got to have at least 1 space. And that's defined by an area of 9 by 18, and we'll further clarify that in code with respect to how that's addressed on a driveway, just a single loaded type driveway. The review process is supposed to be administrative, meaning it would not go to the planning board, although the administrative process will give the planning department, code department, the ability to kick it to the planning board if they feel for one or more reasons it's going to be a challenging site and they need the planning board to weigh in and provide that guidance. So there is that safety valve there. And importantly, the design has to be consistent with the principal structure in terms of color, siding, pitch, general architectural details. We're not going to be regulating down to the nth degree, but we want to make sure that if it's visible from the public right of way, that it's not going to be a contrasting type 2 different structures, because then you lose that accessory element that it may look a little less like a single family lot and a little bit more towards an apartment or something else that clearly creates disturbance in terms of the streetscape, the coloring, the design. In terms of setbacks, right now 5 feet from rear and side setbacks, but we recognize that we need to respect the neighboring properties. So if you are going to have an accessory dwelling unit, you want to make sure that the entrance is not facing directly within that side yard setback. Any area in which the tenants or the owners of the property are outside congregating, again, it's not necessarily right on the property line for the most part. That doesn't mean that you can't go out and hang out on your property line. It's just where the orientation of the structure is placed in terms of ingress and egress, for decks, etc. We want to respect the neighboring properties if we're providing this density bonus. The heights. So if it's an attached ADU, consistent with the current regulations, that the height and setbacks of the principal structure apply. And that's what it would be if it's an attached one. If it's detached, we recognize that we're going to need to provide a little bit more flexibility for this. Currently, the code has a 12-foot limit for accessory structures, and putting aside ADUs, talking with the city, that has presented some problems in terms of having an opportunity for storage and just a structure large enough for a typical garage type use. So in the case of a detached garage with putting an accessory dwelling unit on top, you certainly could not do that at 12-foot limitation. So we're going to come back to that and look at it strictly from a building code and architectural perspective. How tall will it need to be if it's a one-car garage with an accessory structure on top? Let's just go right to the facts and not try to estimate that. And that's what we're going to work closely with the building department as well as our architects on staff. And then finally, residential design visual preference survey. It's a mouthful, but we have multiple boards in there that the intent there was to get the public thinking about design, orientation, architecture, and you can do it in person, you can do it online. There's a QR code there. The link is also on the website. It's on the welcome board up front, and if you still have a problem trying to find it, give us an email, give us a call. We'll make sure you get that. It might be a little easier to do it online, but I have noticed, and thank you for people that have been putting dots and comments on the boards and the sidebook there. So again, the purpose of this is to begin the conversation of design and make it known to the public that we're just not going through this process and looking at uses and density and forgetting about the fact that the design of residential and commercial structures plays a significant role in the character and quality of the city and the neighborhood. And while we're not going to be regulating the design of every single family dwelling, we generally avoid that. Most of the time, it's just lot placement, setbacks, etc. As you get up to 2 family, 3 family, and above, that's where design guidelines, which are you should do this, and then the standards, which is you shall do this, come into play. And the next public design workshop will be focused on residential and commercial design standards, as well as an introductory into the historic district improvements that we're going to be making. So it's a review process and historic preservation guidelines. So those are going to be handled separately. The point of this exercise is to get not only the public, but the PAC and everybody thinking about, okay, it's not just use, it's not just density, it's how the unit is constructed, the types of elements. I love porches. Who doesn't love porches, right? The more porches, the better in certain neighborhoods. And that's why, again, we're providing that flexibility in RH. So if you want to put a porch on, you can go to the CBA to case for that. But it's also about how row houses, or we might call them attached houses, duplexes, 3 families are treated, with the goal of saying, hey, we can allow for for higher intensity uses. That doesn't mean that they're going to look like plain brick building that has absolutely no character. The idea here is that we get density, but we protect and actually enhance and improve the character of your neighborhoods. So that's the starting point here, and I hope that everybody takes the time to take a look at those boards, goes online, and you can answer questions just for single family, just for attached, duplex, 3-family and above, because we do ask for, and it's not required, but we do ask for why you made a particular decision that you did, why you chose which structure you thought were important. So you don't have to answer them all, you can do just ones that you like. And when we go to the next design workshop, we'll have probably a similar survey, but that gets into more specific elements in terms of the architecture details, as opposed to just a general survey that we're looking at right now. So I hope you take the time, give it some thought, and I hope every time you drive down different neighborhoods, you'll think about neighborhoods a little bit different. And as a planner, and my wife, she said, I never think of neighborhoods the same way. They look at everything completely different because you're always pointing out these different aspects. And I hope that's a big part of what you take away from this process, and you start to think about your neighborhoods a little bit differently and how they can be improved and how you can adapt and allow for a little higher density. So again, our future design workshops, next one will be on design standards, guidelines, and historic preservation. And then our final one will be on downtown mixed use and corridors, which will have some design aspects in there, but we'll be digging a lot into some of the zoning changes for those areas as well. So thank you for taking the time to come out. Now's the time for any public questions, suggestions, comments, anything else that you might want to discuss. And if you don't want to talk about them tonight, you go onto the project website. There's an email link there that you can provide email to us, and we get that directly to full staff, and we'll keep tabs of that. And I'll respond to everybody, particularly if you have a question or looking for a clarification.
We do have some participants online, and it looks like one does have their hand raised.
Okay, great.
Oh, I don't know if you,
We can hear you.
okay, wasn't sure if you were, I couldn't hear you actually address me. Yeah, I wanted to, so I don't know when this is if this is gonna come up in future conversations. But I think one of the most glaring issues I see, so I've been working in affordable housing for the better part of a decade. And, really, I think what the city of Plattsburgh is having a hard time with is the lack of rent stabilization. So New York State allows for rents to be raised, a crazy amount with any sort of real barriers put in place. And municipalities on their own can do something to prevent that. So you can create a ton of housing, but if it's still going to be $1,100 for a 1-bedroom, it's not going to fix the problem. So I don't know if those types of, if there's talk about regulations involving that. Also, well, I'll just leave it at that because I have a million thoughts, but that's the first thing, because that's the most glaring to me, is that, and I'm not talking rent control because I know that freaks everyone out. I'm talking specifically about some type of stabilization. I mean, even here, by allowing folks to create, actually, yeah, I'll stop there. Sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a very good question. And yeah, so rent stabilization, the other terms that have been tossed out, I think the City of Kingston's been trying to work on something to try to hold rents down. That's on its face that's separate from zoning. We had talked about We only touched on it very briefly, and it hasn't come up with necessarily in the RH or R1 district, and we expect this to be more specific to R2, B1, B2 if we introduce housing, which we're considering, and then central business district, but inclusionary housing, which provides incentives. So that in terms of using the menu, that's the first thing that we'll go to as a potential tool to encourage developers to provide housing at a price point that's a certain percentage of the median income for the region. And the idea here is you incentivize individuals to provide housing at that cost that would be maintained at that cost. And if you do that, you get either maybe an additional story that provides additional density or just additional density in general. So that is one of the primary ways in which the zoning law can effectuate that type of change. It still is a voluntary process of the developer. And so the next element, and I know you had mentioned that we can allow for additional density in all the districts. That's not necessarily going to change the price points that the developers put them at. Some of which is specific to, hey, the numbers got to pencil out. You know, developers, they're a business, their goal is to make money. So we recognize that. But short of that, it's the idea that we provide more flexibility for housing in different zoning districts than we currently have. And there have been studies, and you know, you could look at 3 different studies and come away with 3 different answers. But there was recent ones that have looked at many locations, mid-sized to larger cities, that have upzoned and allowed for additional higher density housing. And for the most part, the costs have come down somewhat. It's not going to come down significantly. It's not a panacea. But municipalities are somewhat confined in what they can actually do in terms of costs. So the state's going to have to address the ability in terms of rent control or other types of stabilization. The city could.
Sorry, if I could, just for a point of clarification, that does not have to be up to the state to enact rent control or rent stabilization. That can happen on a municipality level, which means it could be a county or it could be city, town, whatever. So just to clarify.
Right. Yeah, there is that. But in terms of, I know the state has been looking at a variety of other ways to try to increase the access to housing and deal with costs. So it's not just the rent stabilization. But that is certainly, you know, it's a big decision that the city has to make, but that's going to be separate from the zoning. We're not going to get into that as part of this process. It's not within our scope of work, and that's not within the zoning law. So we have to use the tools that we have available. And in terms of the RH and R1 district, you know, what we proposed is what we feel are appropriate measures. We're going to get into the R2 district and the other districts where we'll provide other opportunities for housing, including perhaps the inclusionary housing classes. But I do recognize that is not necessarily going to answer everybody's concerns for providing housing. But we're hoping that by increasing flexibility, eventually the prices will drop and hopefully tend to stabilize and provide more opportunities for people to find quality housing. So thank you. Do we have others online?
Yes, am I on? I have I don't know, all I'm seeing is my name on the screen. I don't know if you're hearing me or not.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My concern, you know, has to do with the vast expansion of student housing, which, you know, began contingent to the areas around the university. Now it expands over to Brinkerhoff and Cornelia, and now Champlain, Montcalm, going down South Catherine Street. And Many of the homes that are being bought up are homes that might be in affordable areas to develop lower income rental apartments. The whole idea of uh, just wide-based dispersion of student housing doesn't sit too well with the idea of building some kind of a community identity or a neighborhood identity. And there's been numerous incidents that have occurred in the areas where student housing exists that drive people out of the neighborhood, essentially. And I wonder where, if anything, the ideas around the type of housing that's being built that facilitates a sense of community or neighborhood togetherness, not coming in with approaches that potentially could damage severely the neighborhood.
Thanks, Ira. I mean, that is another good question. And as proposed for the RH district, we'd only be allowing up to 4 family. Whether that's occupied by students or not, wouldn't necessarily. It's certainly, we're not looking to allow for the 5 family and above, which are, a lot of those are student housing. You know, they'll still remain pre-existing non-conforming. So we're not encouraging any new larger multifamily in the RH district or R1 district for that matter. So only up to 4 family. And along those lines, as we talked about, there'll be some general design standards and guidelines that if you are to build these types of structures, they need to be consistent with the predominant residential character in the neighborhoods, and not look like long kind of row house type student housing, which is clearly outside of the character that we want to avoid. We're also, we'll be discussing in the future property maintenance regulations to provide the city with more tools to deal with properties that are inconsistent with the desired residential character. We've also talked about, so everybody's seen the student housing signs that are placed on usually the second story of all those structures. The committee has recommended prohibiting those, so they'll all have to come down. There'll still be an opportunity to have smaller rental, whether they're placards on the first floor or a small sign out front, similar to like a real estate sign, but that are kept in good shape. So we want to recognize that student housing will remain in this area because it's directly adjacent to the SUNY, and it makes sense, it's walkable. But if we're going to allow additional density in the RH district, there will be some strings attached in terms of the design and the quality of that. So
I just want to add the point that they've moved away from large homes that they've been taken care of by now by student housing. You're seeing more and more single family houses for single families being turned into student housing as well. That's why I'm saying it's eating up, the housing stock as well.
right. And that does present, the challenge here is where we want to provide for opportunities for all residents to have quality and safe housing. But from a zoning perspective, we cannot say, this area is strictly for students or non-students. It's a free market, and we can't regulate that. The landlord can decide who they want to rent to within a certain certain realm. In terms of, I know in Albany, they will only rent to students in certain areas, and they won't rent to non-students. Is that constitutional? I don't know, but not really. It's pretty much discrimination. But that's not something that we deal with from a zoning perspective. And we recognize that if we do allow for increased density, that some single-family homes might be converted, and some may not. So, but we have to meet the challenge of providing additional housing, and whether it's for students or for long-term residents, don't think that's as important as how the property looks and works within the neighborhood. And if we're providing more housing, again, the idea is that eventually that the overall cost will start to be reduced. And then, like I said, couple that with the design standards and improved property maintenance and other limitations that have, if enacted, we feel that will make a significant improvement of those neighborhoods in terms of quality, character. So, thank you, Ira. Yes.
I just wanted to ask about the distinction. You mentioned like shall versus should. So it's just helpful for my brain to be like, okay, so these rezoning or upzoning propositions of like changing the setback requirements, those would be standards, whereas like the design preferences, those are the guidelines, like those actually come in.
Right.
Those would be written into the.
Well, they would be written in, but they would just have different terminology. So it would be usually design standards and guidelines are in one section, but it's very clear if like your front door or the front of your house that faces the public right of way shall have, that's where your entrance will be, and a certain percentage of that needs to be glass as opposed to just a door with a blank wall. You can't only a certain percentage of the wall, whether that's residential, I know when we get into commercial, can be a blank wall. You have to have some type of architectural details. So that would be a shall, whereas should could get into kind of roof designs, different architectural details, unique aspects that are more to be, we'd love to kind of do this, but here's the palette of design things that we want to take into consideration. And while the planning board can't, or whether it's the planning board or a staff review, can't say you have to do this, it's basically, it's a conversation. So it's like, why not? Add a little bit more to your structure, more consistent with the prevailing character of that neighborhood. So there will be ones that are clearly should, and in the design standards guidelines section that starts right off, it explains the difference between should and shall. And there's always the ability for, whether it's a staff review or the planning board, that they can waive and modify some standards. But there's enough there that it makes it clear to the review board and the homeowner that this is what I'm looking for. And we do expect that the new code will have very graphic visual examples of homes within the city, because we have a mix on the visual preference survey of homes within the city and then other ones that we have and came across to provide examples. So, hey, you can use these different characteristics. The idea is that we want something that is of interest, not just a blank wall. And then when it comes to historic structures, that'll be a little different process in terms of shells. Does that clarify?
Yes, that's perfect.
Anybody else? It's like we lost everybody. Zoning will do that to you.
They said dinner.
Yeah, next time we'll do a pop-up.
There you go.
All right, well, if there's nothing else, thank you for coming and sticking out. Please go online and do the survey, tell your friends and neighbors, pass the word on, anything we can to get people more involved. It's going to make this process that much better. So, thanks, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.